European Christians mined Jewish history to explain the origins of the Americas and its indigenous peoples. This attention to Judaism was in fact more than just sermonic. Christians used the history, culture, and language of the Jews to interpret their American encounters. They searched the Bible for clues to the origins of Native Americans, to determine the potential of indigenous people for Christian salvation, and to weigh the lives and deaths of Aborigines. Jewish history provided the scaffolding from which Christians crafted new understandings of the relationships to people in the Americas and Africa. The century-long descent of the Indian in the English mind, for instance, from lost Jews destined for Christianization and assimilation to a savage and inferior race fated for extinction, was one branch of a body of social ideas that transformed the intellectual and institutional cultures of Europe and the Americas. Those ideas had histories. Christians believed Indians to be a lost tribe of Jews.
Ever since European colonists began settling in the land that would later become the United States of America, many artifacts have been discovered which suggest the ancient Native American mound builder civilizations are descendants of Hebrew people who migrated to ancient North America during the 500s BC, which is approximately the earliest estimated dates of the Hopewell mound builders in Florida, Tennessee, and Iowa.
Catholic missionaries in the Spanish colonies, like their Protestant peers, felt compelled to address the lineage of Indians, which had consequences for Christians' relationships with Native America. Early Spanish invaders looked for resemblances between Indian cultures and Judaism, and commonalities between indigenous languages and Hebrew. As we know, Christopher Columbus brought Luis de Torres, a converso, with him as Hebrew interpreter to the people who he might meet on the other side of the world. By the 1560s, Spanish clerics were debating whether Indians were descendants of one of the lost tribes of Israel, or if perceived similarities to the Jews were products of a satanic manipulation intended to render them useless to the Christian God. Protestant colonialism brought equal enthusiasm for discovering the Jewish origins of Indians. In his mid-17th century description of New Netherland, the Dutch lawyer Adrian van der Donck admitted that the theological pressure. If Christians were unable to reconcile the existence of Native Americans with biblical narrative, then, quote, the doctrines of the Holy Scriptures would be subverted and ruined. Several years earlier, Domine Johannes Megapolensis in 1642, Megapolensis encountered an elderly Indian woman who was likely Mohawk and who repeated part of the Iroquois creation story, which included, in fact, the story of a divine feud between two brothers. Domine Megapolensis took this as a variant of the story of Cain and Abel and further evidence of the Jewish heritage of the Indians. The Puritan divine John Eliot explained his fascination with Native Americans as in part of a product of his hope to, quote, that I might find under what covenant and promise their forefathers lived. Eliot speculated that they were descended from Shem. Other Puritan ministers pointed to a tendency to speak in parables. A critic of colonial Indian policy and a founder of Rhode Island, the Reverend Roger Williams, also saw parallels between Jewish and Indian cultures, including the anointing of heads and the exchange of dowries for wives. Rabbi Menashe ben Israel's treatise on the Jewish ancestry of American Indians validated this Christian obsession. The essay repeated the 1644 testimony of Aaron Levi to the Sephardic rabbis of Amsterdam. Levi said that he had encountered Indians in the Cordilleras Mountains of South America who revealed themselves to be Jews who knew the Torah and who traced their lineage to the tribe of Reuben. Thomas Thorogood, the Puritan minister, seized upon this evidence and expanded it. Indians were reluctant to eat swine, he wrote. They often dressed like Jews and intermarried within extended families. Jewish and Indian women offered further evidence of a connection. He postulated, in fact, that an ancient tribe of Jews reached Mexico and Peru, where the primary Jewish influence could be seen in temple architecture, the practice of circumcision, ritual sacrifice, and the knowledge of the Great Flood. The monumental architecture of Peru, Mexico, and the Mississippi Valley suggested that these Jews migrated north, separating into contemporary nations and undergoing a process of cultural devolution. In 1649, when Parliament ratified Edward Winslow's act creating the New England Company, it affirmed this link to Jewish history. The New England Company promised that education and evangelization of Indians would quicken the conversion of Jews and fulfill biblical prophecy. Missionaries were learning Native American languages, baptizing many indigenous people, and beginning the process of bringing Christian Indians, particularly children, into the English towns and households for education and apprenticeship. A work of God, in short, had begun in New England, and Parliament sought to hurry its course. Its progress required, quote, that fit instruments be encouraged and maintained to pursue it. Universities, schools, and nurseries of literature settled for further instructing and civilizing them. European intellectuals attempted to connect Hebrew to spoken and written languages throughout the world. They studied Hebrew as the original language or the Adamic tongue, and searched for its residue in non-European languages to prove the Jewish ancestry of their speakers. The belief that Native Americans were wild encouraged the notion that their languages were purer expressions of this ancient tongue. One of the first English colonists to study Algonquian, Roger Williams, concluded that it shared, I quote, affinity with Hebrew and Greek, and held potentially important clues to religious history.